Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on the essentials of open access. We are thrilled that you could all join us today. Before we get started, just a few things. If you could all please, if you haven't already, mute yourselves just so that we don't have any background noise. If during the course of the webinar any of you have any questions, do feel free to type these into the question and answers forum. You will find that on the top left hand of your screen. I'm here with a colleague who will be monitoring those questions as we go along. Also, you'll see there might be a video box in the right-hand screen. You can minimize that if you want to have the full screen of the presentation. All right, so my name is Sara Bosshart. I am the Open Access Publisher at IWA Publishing. Please feel free after today's webinar, if you have any questions, to email me at sbosshart@iwap.co.uk. I am here today with my colleague, Sara. Two Saras today. She's here as well.
Hi, I'm Sara Cooper, or Sara number 2 in this case. I'm Marketing and Communications Assistant here at IWA Publishing, and I'll be talking a little bit about how you can promote your work to make the maximum impact online.
Thanks. All right, so before we get started with the webinar, I wanted to wish all of you a happy Open Access Week. For those of you that don't know, Open Access Week started as a way to spread knowledge and awareness of open access. Each year has its own theme, and this year's theme is Designing Equitable Foundations for Open Knowledge. And it's great because today we have participants who registered for the webinar from 29 different countries across the globe. So we're really hoping that this sort of crash course into open access will help all of you learn a little bit more about open access and ways to broaden the reach of your work. Before we get started, I just wanted to gauge a little bit about where you guys are, so if you could just answer the poll that should have popped up on your screen. If you could let me know if you're a graduate student, if you're early career researcher, or more mid to late career, whether you work in industry or other. Great, so I can see those results coming in now. It looks like we've got quite a spread, so that's great. People from all different aspects of these areas, wonderful. All right, also, secondly, if you could just, first of all, describe your knowledge of open access. It could be you know absolutely nothing, so the concept is new to you. You might have heard of it, but you might never have published OA. Maybe you're considering publishing open access and you want to know more. Or maybe you've published open access and you know a little, or maybe you know a lot about open access. All right, so I can see those results. Again, it looks like quite a few of you, the concept is completely new, so that's great. We're really going to be talking about some of the basics today. Some of you are there in the middle. We've got quite a spread on this, so that's great. All right, so just a little bit about how today is going to go. I'm going to start talking about open access, and then towards the end of the webinar, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Sara Cooper, and she's going to talk about ways to spread the word once you've published your paper, Open Access. Just a little bit to start about IWA Publishing. So in case you haven't heard of us, we are the publishing branch of the International Water Association and the leading publisher of water, wastewater, and environmental publications. We publish 14 journals across water, science, technology. You might recognize some of these journal titles. We recently revamped all of our journals earlier this year to have that uniform look. We have 11 hybrid journals, so that means that you can publish open access in them, but they are also traditional subscription journals. And we have at the bottom, you can see our 3 open access journals, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on in the webinar. So, part 1, open access. Before I start, I just wanted to give you a very brief introduction to publishing. So, the first publication came out in about 1665. So, publishing is not new. It's been around for a long time. And there is record of first peer review happening in around the 1800s, most likely in France. And the past few decades is really when we've seen this huge shift from predominantly print to digital. So most publications are now online, which has really been important for the rise of open access, which I'll explain in a little bit. And today we have more than 2,000 publishers producing more than 2.5 million articles worldwide. So it's a huge amount of research output. So what really is open access? Essentially, open access is the free, unrestricted access to research outputs. And generally, in order for something to qualify as open access, it should be digital, it should be online, it should be free of charge, so you should be able to access it for free, And also importantly, it should be free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. I'll talk a little bit about that later as well, but for now, the important thing is that with open access, as someone who might want to access content, you should be able to read it, download it, copy it, distribute it, print, search, crawl, in the case of robots, use them for indexing and pass them on as data and software. So essentially the idea is really to be able to reuse content as much as possible and have it be free for anyone around the world to access as well. As you can imagine, there are several advantages to this. As I mentioned, anyone anywhere in the world can read open access papers. It doesn't matter if you're affiliated with an institution that has subscriptions. You can be someone who lives in Indonesia or in Africa or somewhere in South America, and you can access open access articles regardless of whether you are subscribed or your institution is subscribed. There have also been a lot of studies that have shown that open access articles have higher citation rates. If you think about this, this makes sense because the more that people are able to access research, the more they're able to then use it and then cite it in their future work. Also, and I'll talk about this more a little later, it's compliant with funding mandates. So a lot of funders that are funding research that is going on are now saying that their researchers have to publish open access. So that's part of it as well. You'll have greater exposure for your work, greater access to the public. Often that public is the one that are paying their taxes that then goes back into the money to fund research. So it's important that everyone has access to that research. There's also the potential for higher interdisciplinary collaborations. So if more people are reading your paper, they might think, oh, actually, this is something really interesting. I might want to work on this with that person as well. So you can broaden your network through that publication as well. And of course, the greater influence of your work for future development, and practitioners and industry can also apply your work to build on it as well. I also wanted to mention a few of the problems inherent in publishing and how open access is thought to solve some of these. So one of the big problems with getting research out there often is time. So firstly, the time from when you do your research to when people are actually able to get that research and build upon it. So one great example of this was the Zika crisis, and obviously there were a lot of labs that were doing research that was really time sensitive and would help reduce the potential risk from Zika outbreaks. And it was really important to get that out as soon as possible. So that's somewhere where open access, which tends to have faster publication times and different outputs, which I'll talk about later, can be a great way to get research out much more quickly. Secondly, there's some studies that have looked at the amount of time researchers take to try to find research. And with open access, you can access it immediately. You don't have to go from one journal and hit a paywall to another journal and hit a paywall. You'll get that paper immediately. Secondly, one of the big things as well is transparency and reproducibility. So this was an interesting study that Nature conducted a few years ago, and they surveyed researchers across the globe and asked whether they felt that there was a crisis of reproducibility. And 52% of the researchers surveyed did believe there was a crisis. Interestingly, 70% failed to reproduce another scientist's experiment, and very strikingly, 15% failed to even reproduce their own experiment. A lot of what's going on here is selective reporting, this huge pressure to publish, especially in high-impact journals, low statistical power, poor analysis. With open access, you can access the paper, but also if people have added data or different methods as supplemental material, you can access all of that information so that you can then try to reproduce the study, and it will add to the greater transparency of the work. So let's get started with a few different types of open access. You might have heard of some of these, you might not have heard of any of them, but essentially these are all different ways that you can make that paper openly available to people. So let me start with preprints. So preprints are a version of your paper posted before it's even submitted to a journal. And I'll go into that into a little bit more detail a little bit later. Green open access is open access through a repository. So generally what this means is that you would post a version of your paper, not the final version, but you would post it in a free repository after the embargo period set by the publisher, which is normally about a year. Gold open access is open access immediately after publication through generally an open access license, and this is normally paid for, so you would pay for gold open access. Diamond is essentially gold open access for free. There's a few publishers that operate this, and actually two of our journals right now, H2 Open Journal and our latest Blue Green Systems Journal, operate under a Diamond open access model. Generally, it's unsustainable long-term, so you might eventually see fees for publication, but that is one option out there. Bronze is content made free to read on a publisher website. So for instance, we have made the archives of our Journal of Water and Health beyond 2 years free on the website, so anyone can read those. They're not under a license, but they are free to read. So looking a little bit more at the different versions. So let's imagine that you have a manuscript and you are thinking you want to submit it for publication. You have different options. You could start by submitting it to a preprint server. So that is where you would put it on the server and it would be immediately open. Anyone can read it and comment on it. You could then post it directly from the preprint server. You could submit it to a journal, or you could skip the stage of submitting it to a preprint server and you could submit directly to a journal. Then let's say your paper gets accepted, it's gone through peer review. You can publish in a traditional subscription journal, so that would not be open access, or you can pay an open access fee and you can have it be open access immediately upon publication. And the version that is open access is the official published version. You then have another option. So say you decided to publish in a subscription journal and it's not open access. You can wait the embargo period, so you can wait either 6 months or a year, depending on the publisher, and then you can submit the version, the accepted version, and I'll explain that a little bit more on the next slide, but you can submit that accepted version as green open access to a repository. So this might be your institution's repository, or some countries have their own repositories, or funders as well. So that is really green open access. So let's look a little bit more at the paper versions. So as I mentioned, the preprint version is the version before you submit to a publisher. So it's your very first version once you've written up your research. Then if you do submit it to a publisher, it might undergo peer review. And as soon as it's accepted, that is the version that you could, after the embargo period, submit in a in an institutional repository. So it's not the official version of record. Say that your paper is accepted by a publisher, you are normally asked to sign a copyright transfer agreement, and then at that point the publisher will copy edit it, they'll typeset it, and then they'll publish it. And that version of record, the published version, is the one that if you had paid to make it open access and you selected an open access license, that would then be gold open access. So let's look a little bit closer at green open access. So again, as I mentioned, this is open access after 6 months to a year, where you have the right to post the author accepted version of your manuscript into a repository. So this is a good example of the right way to archive your paper in a repository. You should always include reference to the publisher's copyright. So if you can see here, here is the reference to the copyright. You should always also include reference to the version of record, including the journal name, volume number, issue, and DOI. So you can see that's here. And you should also always include a link to the original version of record. So that's here. And you can see here that the version is not the version of record. This is really the version that was accepted after peer review. So that's how to correctly correctly post in a repository. And if you ever have questions about what different journal publishers, what their policies are, I would check out Sherpa Romeo. They're a great site. They'll show you what the embargo period is, if it's 6 months or a year, and whether publishers will allow you to do green open access. Just wanted to point out that there's been a huge rise in green open access. You can see that there are now thousands of different repositories. This is from Open Door. It's a directory of open access repositories. I would encourage you to check them out, and you can see all the different repositories out there that you can post your paper green open access. So looking a little bit closer at preprints, as I mentioned, this is the version of your paper that you would post on a repository before you submit to a scientific publication. And the advantage of these is that they're very fast. So they'll go up within 24 hours. They can also receive a DOI, so they are citable. They also establish a precedent. So if you post a preprint, that says immediately that you are the one working on that research, so people know. They also provide access to the content that might otherwise be lost. So not necessarily all preprints do go on to be published. So you can put anything up there that you might think would be interesting to the scientific community. They can be submitted before peer review and they can be commented on. So often people will submit preprints hoping that it might improve the paper. And what a lot of publishers have started to do is to look at preprints and have actually tried to start poaching different papers from preprint servers. And you can keep updating your preprint at any time. And then, of course, you can submit to different journals. Let's look a little bit more at Gold OA. So with Gold OA, the traditional publishing model, essentially an author would submit to a journal, and then libraries and individuals pay to read the different publications. With Gold OA, an author submits their article and they would pay upon acceptance, and then it's free to read. So it's not that it's entirely free. Publishers do have to stay sustainable, so we're just moving where payment is coming from the end to the beginning. A little bit about licenses. So we do get a lot of questions, and what's really important to remember with licenses is this really is a personal choice, and it's up to you how open you want your license to be. So basically open access at its purest hopes that papers will be basically open to read, to cite, that anyone can crawl them. So the license that is most in fitting with open access is the CC BY license that allows the reuse of pretty much your paper for pretty much anything. If you feel that you want to have a little bit more of a conservative approach, say you don't want your paper to be reused for commercial gain, you could go for the CC BY and C license. So that means that anyone can reuse, read, build upon, etc. They just can't do that for commercial gain. And if you really want to go fully restrictive route where people can really read, download, and share it, but they can't do anything building upon it, so no derivatives, you could go for the CC BY and CND, which is non-commercial, non-derivative. And if you're interested in the CC BY and CSA, which is basically non-commercial, so people can't share it, can't use it commercially, but they have to use the same license if they do make any use of your work. And what's really important with open access licenses is that people can reuse and do all this stuff with your paper, but they always have to cite the original paper, so you are getting credit for your work. So as I mentioned, we've really been seeing a huge rise in the number of open access papers. We've gone from more traditional publishing, and a lot of what would have been traditionally in subscription journals is moving up into open access papers. So why are we seeing this? You can see from here that in 2000, there were only about 4 different open access publishers. And in 2018, we've got thousands. This is just a small subset that I'm showing here, but they've really popped up all over the place. And not only that, but subscription publishers have started to have open access options. So we're really seeing a huge rise in the options out there for people wanting to publish open access. So why the transition? A lot of this has been due to funding mandates across the globe. Different countries are having different approaches to open access. You can see here that in 2013, the US was talking about open access and where they wanted to go. China started talking about open access policies in 2014. India was having a big push for open access in 2014 as well. We see that in Africa, they're still debating in terms of what they want to do with open access. We have here in Australia, they're also talking about how they want to go about and what they want to do with funded research. And really where we've seen the most dramatic push in open access is in Europe, where EU leaders are calling for immediate open access to all scientific papers by 2020, so that's very soon. And latest, some of you may have seen this, essentially 11 funders got together and decided that they want to make a huge push for open access and are going to start mandating as of 2020 that researchers can no longer publish in hybrid journals. That means that they have to publish in only journals that are fully open access, that will publish everything immediately through the gold open access route. And actually there are now 14 funding organizations that have signed up for Plan S, and I'm sure a lot more will follow. As you can see from this slide, it's really been a global push. There are open access mandates all over the world. Mostly the numbers are much higher in Europe, but there's a lot in the US, quite a few in Africa and Asia, Australia, Southern Europe, South America. So this really is a global discussion to try to make research openly accessible everywhere. And of course, we can't talk about open access without predatory publishers. For those of you that have maybe heard of predatory publishers, this might be a concern. We get a lot of questions about this with open access. Essentially, with the gold open access model, there were some publishers that weren't really publishers that started to try to take advantage of the fact that authors were paying to publish. And so I just wanted to mention just a few things to to look at in order to avoid publishing open access in a predatory publisher. The first thing I would do is always check, is the journal indexed in the directory of open access journals? That's a great way to start. They have a very stringent application process and check every journal that is submitted to make sure that they are legitimate. That said, not all journals that are legitimate are in there. So if it's not in DOAJ, I would see, have you heard of the journal? I would ask other people if they've heard of it. I would look at the editorial boards of the journal, and if you recognize anyone, or even if you don't, get in touch with them and ask if they actually know the journal and if they're really on the board. And if they are, that's a pretty good sign that it's a legitimate journal. Also, a big thing, open access charges should be easy to find. You shouldn't have to dig too deeply on a publisher's website to find those open access charges. So just a little bit about IWA Publishing and open access. Our emphasis is really quality over quantity, and all of the surplus generated from open access is redirected to the missions of the International Water Association and the great work that they're doing. We like to think of it as open access for the future. We've been doing open access for a while now, so we announced our options in our hybrid journals in 2010. We launched our first open access book in 2013. We also have 3 fully open access journals. We launched our interdisciplinary water journal, H2 Open Journal, in 2016, and that's free to publish in that until 2020. We have our Journal of Water Reuse and Desalination, which used to be subscription, but is now fully open access. We changed that to open access in 2017. And this year, we just launched in a series of launch events in September. We were in China and then Japan and then Italy launching this journal. And this is on blue-green system, so it's really a sustainable water use in cities of the future. And it's free to publish in that until 2021. We also have open access books, if that's something you're interested in. 32 of our open access books are on OWAPN, and 11 of our gold open access books you can find on our own website, OWAPN Online. And there was an interesting study done recently on some of the open access books in Nature, and they found that open access books had 7 times more downloads, about 50% more citations, and 10 times more online mentions. So they're really getting read a lot more and getting more broadly disseminated. I also wanted to mention, so for us, we have a waiver program for authors in developing countries. So it is free for anyone in the blue countries on this map to publish open access in any one of our IWA publishing journals. For people in countries that are orange on this map, you can have 50% off of our OA publication fees in any one of our IWA publishing journals as well. And another thing that we're working on, we've partnered with Knowledge Unlatched. They are a crowdfunding platform. Essentially, they go to different libraries and try to get funding to flip content to open access. So we have submitted 2 of our journals and 25 of our books, which we're hoping to make open access next year. So that will be very exciting. We are also partnering with different institutions to try to set up agreements whereby researchers affiliated with the institutions can publish in our journals for free. So we just set up an agreement with Wageningen and TU Delft in the Netherlands. So authors from those institutions can now publish open access for free. We are also in the process of setting up an institutional agreement with institutions in Austria. So as of November 1st, we should have about 50 institutions in Austria who can also publish with us for free. I won't go into this too much because we're running out of time and I need to pass over to my colleague, but these are just a few data archives that you can use if you want to make your data open access. And also, I did just want to mention these 2 browser plugins. So they're both pretty similar, but you can download them on your internet browser, and regardless of where you search for content, it will tell you whether there is an open access version, and you can just click on the little icon and it will take you to the version, whether it's gold open access or whether it's green open access in a repository. So that's a really quick way to get to open access content. All right, so now I'm going to pass over to Sara Cooper, and she's going to talk a little bit about spreading the word and how to get your paper out there.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about promoting your work, in particular promoting it online. So as Sarah suggested, publishing and research are increasingly digital areas. Both open access and social media empower authors to champion their own research and to share it widely. Open access aims to be inclusive and accessible anywhere and to anyone. And here are some helpful tips to help you do this. So Firstly, at the point of publication, it's really important to focus on your keywords. So keywords and combinations of keywords are what are picked up by search engines when people are looking for research online. Help your target audience to find your work and use relevant keywords and use them repeatedly, so in your title and in your abstract. This increases the online visibility of your paper as it's more likely to be picked up in a search, so the people you want to find your research can find it more easily. Visibility generally increases usage, meaning more citations and in turn more visibility, so it's a really positive cycle. So we can't talk about promoting your work online nowadays without talking about social media. Once your work is published, it's time to get the word out, and social media can really help you to get it out there as widely as possible. So, like open access is intended to be shared as widely as possible, social media can be a really great tool to help you do this. If you'd like further advice on social media, I would recommend talking to your publisher. They'll be happy to help you, so setting up a social media profile or knowing what to do with the different platforms. So my first tip would be announce work as it's published on social media. People want to discover brand new research, especially research they can access immediately and for free. Make sure that you include a link to your work. It's amazing how many times it's easy to forget this one. But once you've piqued their interest, help them access it. For gold open access in particular, I would recommend using the DOI link, which you can find with your publisher. It just makes sure that readers are taken to the publisher's latest version of that work. You also want to make sure you're hashtagging keywords, so people searching for relevant subjects can find your posts. Think hashtags as search terms for social media. So this could be a subject area, such as wastewater, but also if it's open access, make sure you hashtag this. People will be looking out for free open access material, so they'll often use the search term. Open access is a big selling point, so make sure you're mentioning it. And then a bit more on social media. So make sure your post is attention grabbing. So imagine your message in a sea of posts on a researcher's screen. You can use a quick hook line or a summary that you think will interest people. It's also a good idea to include an image if you have one, whether that's an infographic or a figure from your paper, or an eye-catching photograph, or even the book or journal cover. Images really stand out in crowded feeds. Make sure that your professional online identity is consistent as possible. So make sure you're using the same name, the same title, that all your information is correct. If you keep it consistent on different public accounts, it will really help people recognize you and your work. Also, if you have a researcher identifier, such as ORCID, I'm sure lots of you have heard of that, make sure you include it on your different profiles so people know they're finding the right person. It's also a good idea to link between your different social media accounts. So, for example, if someone finds you on LinkedIn, they're probably interested in following you on Twitter if they know they can see the latest updates in your newest work. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is linking and explaining your work on different platforms. So the more you explain your work and share it on different platforms, people are more likely to find it. So a really simple, effective way is to make sure you're including a link to your article in your email signature. It's a really good way to get people to know that you have new papers out there, and if you mention it's open access, they're far more likely to click and to read it for free. You could also write a blog post to get people interested in your subject, and then make sure you link it to your paper. If you don't have a blog of your own, ask your institution or your publisher. They often have a new space where you can post your own content. The same goes for LinkedIn. Just check with your faculty if they can promote your paper on the company page. You can also explain key findings in a short video. This can be really good for visibility. If you want more information, we've got a helpful link on the screen so you can find out a bit more about how to go about doing that. You can also claim and explain on a site called Kudos. So Kudos is a platform that's totally free for authors to help them promote their work and to track success of their promotions. So you can create an author profile on Kudos, and then you can search for your published paper and claim it, which means linking it to your profile. You can then explain the research in a short plain language summary, which you can then share across social media directly from Kudos. The plain language summary just makes it much easier for your paper to be found by a wider audience. You can also add resources, so any supplementary material, or you could link to any blog posts or extra content that you have. So the Kudos platform will also suggest more actions you can take to boost your work's visibility, e.g. sharing on social media. And the image I have on screen is someone who's kind of filled out all the actions, done all the explanations, and now their paper is really easy to find on Kudos. You can also share a trackable link to your paper directly through Kudos so you can monitor how it's received. More on that later. So the next step is measuring your impact. And I'm sure you've probably all heard of altmetrics, or at least seen this colourful donut, which is the altmetric donut. So the different colours on this ring show a breakdown of where your research has been mentioned, whether that's a news outlet, or a blog, or on Twitter, policy papers, and so on. It then calculates a number to indicate the reach of your paper. So generally a higher number means a greater reach and a larger impact. So we've actually just linked altmetrics to our new website, as you can see in this screenshot. So you can find this donut next to any paper and click for a breakdown of how the paper is being used and shared. Altmetrics scores can also be found on Kudos. So as previously mentioned, Kudos is a great free tool for authors. So not only can you claim, explain and share your article, you can also track the impact of your activity. So on Kudos you can find the altmetrics score, the number of views on your profile and your papers on Kudos, the number of click-throughs to read the full publication, and the citations listed on Crossref. So on screen I've just shown you a screenshot of the sort of breakdown you can get for a paper on Kudos. So the A circled there is an author activity. Let's say they've shared their paper on Twitter. And you can see that that action seems to have increased the full text downloads, the abstract views, the shares, and the views of the paper on Kudos. We find that authors tend to like Kudos as they find it very satisfying to see the results of their efforts. If you want to learn more, just get in touch. I'll have my email up at the end, or you can see the link on screen for some tips on using Kudos to maximise your impact. So that takes me to my final point. I'd really recommend reaching out to your publisher for any additional advice on aspects of promoting your research. We're normally very happy to help you out, give you advice on social media, any marketing material or press releases. I've included contact details on screen for our Marketing Digital Development Manager, Margarita Ligizu, and myself, Marketing Communications Assistant. So feel free to send us an email and we'll get back to you.
All right, so thank you so much for listening to our webinar. At this stage, if any of you have any questions, please do put them into the question and answer form on the left-hand side. Otherwise, do feel free to email us after. You can find our email addresses here. We have also been recording these slides, so we will share them with all of you after the webinar if you'd like to review any of the points that we mentioned. So we'll just stick around for a few minutes in case any of you have any questions. If not, feel free to leave the webinar whenever you'd like. Thanks again. It looks like we have a question here. Sorry, we have a bit of technical glitch there. So we say, do I understand it right that with OA, one publishes the paper and does all the marketing and impact measurement at the same time? So I guess to answer that, not necessarily. So, I mean, if you publish open access, so say you're a researcher and you've decided to publish open access, say with IWA Publishing, we will still do all of what we would normally do with our subscription papers. So there's no difference in terms of our marketing and the impact that we measure on our publishing site as with normal papers. It's all the same. The only added advantage with open access is that you can share it much more broadly because anyone can reach the publication. So say you wanted to share your article that was published in a subscription journal, you could send links to it, but not everyone would necessarily be able to access that paper because it might be behind a paywall. With open access, it's much easier to share it broadly because you can share the link and anyone would be able to access the paper.
Yeah, rest assured from the marketing side, open access papers will be treated exactly the same as our other journals. We have marketing processes in place for all of our content, so whether that be sharing through emails on our own channels, just as Sarah said, open access links just kind of, it's a really great opportunity for authors to share it as widely as possible as well. That was a great question. Any others?
Okay, well, it looks like that's it. Again, if you do have any questions that you think of after the fact, feel free to get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. Another thing is that we are thinking of hosting other webinars down the line on different aspects of the publishing process. So if you have any topics that you'd like to learn more about, please do email us with any suggestions. We would love to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you.